Welcome to the Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Gail Gazelle. Dr. Gazelle is an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. She is also the author of a new book, Mindful MD: 6 Ways Mindfulness Restores Your Autonomy and Cures Healthcare Burnout. She's also the author of Everyday Resilience, a practical guide to build inner strength and weather life's challenges. I think it's telling that we need books like this, and we're going to discuss that issue with Dr. Gazelle. But before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor, locumstory.com. Maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story. But do you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities might surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource. It has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. It's easy. And now, without further ado, to my guest, Dr. Gail Gazelle. Welcome, Dr. Gazelle.
Thanks so much, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, Dr. Gazelle, it's my pleasure. And I saw the topic of your book and I said, oh no, another book about burnout. So why do we even have this problem? I mean, everywhere you turn, it's burnout this, burnout that. So many doctors burned out. I don't remember this when I went to medical school. What has happened?
Isn't it interesting that we're in this kind of a pickle in healthcare where everybody's talking about burnout? And why is everybody talking about burnout? Because it is so incredibly prevalent. It was prevalent before the pandemic. And of course, the stresses and strains of the pandemic have only made things worse. And when I think about my own burnout trajectory, I really struggled with burnout along the way. I was a busy internist and hospice physician. I was raising a son on my own. I had a busy academic career here at Harvard Medical School in Boston. And I never felt like I was good enough. When I was home with my son, I was guilty that I wasn't taking care of patients or reading the latest journal articles in my field. When I was at work, I felt tremendously guilty that somehow I should be doing more with my son. I should be a better parent. And I never felt like I was good enough here at Harvard Medical School or as a doctor. I was so busy comparing myself to everybody else and seeing where I came up short. And my own journey really was about figuring out how to get out of this. And that required not just changing bosses, not just changing locations, not just changing my electronic health record, but really changing the way I interacted with my circumstances. And just to add to that, I got coached along the way, found it life-changing, and became a coach. And I've coached over 500 physicians and physician leaders in the last 12 years. So let's talk more about burnout, but I do have some important ideas about why we physicians are really a setup for burnout and what we can do to move beyond it and really thrive in the careers we've worked so incredibly hard to build and develop.
One thing you mentioned, you're at Harvard and you said you didn't feel that you were, up to speed, right? And I'm sure there were plenty of people who were eager to point that out. One thing people don't realize about medical training is it's very competitive, and that doesn't go away. I don't know if that has much to do with the current problem of burnout, but I certainly remember that. More knowledge, more skill, more papers. I don't remember it being particularly a supportive environment. What do you think about that?
I think that's a really important point. And before I dive into the topic, I'll just say that I cover this in my book, Mindful MD: 6 Ways Mindfulness Restores Your Autonomy and Cures Healthcare Burnout. And the first section of the book, which is the short half of the book, the short part of the book, is really what I think about as the roots of burnout. And you're touching on an important one here: comparisons, ratings, and rankings. When we think back on our medical school and residency and fellowship training, if that's relevant, all those comparisons with our peers. And guess what? It wasn't really focused on what we were excelling at, it was focusing on where we were coming short. And many of us internalized that metric. So, as you said, when I was moving forward in my career, here I am at Harvard Medical School. I published twice in the New England Journal. You'd think I'd be feeling great about myself. And yet, my focus was somehow that I was falling short, that I wasn't as good as my peers, that somehow they were doing better at this whole thing of being a physician, academic or otherwise. And I think that that's a little bit of the backstory, one part of the backstory of why we are so prone to burnout. Another factor, which maybe you can relate to this from your training, and I think many of your listeners who aren't quite as white haired as you and I, Andrew,
Thank you.
that the orientation was really perfect or a failure, right? We could easily be thrown under the bus on rounds. We could be pimped on rounds. We could be shamed on rounds, blamed if we didn't know one thing in the differential diagnosis of some rare disorder, right? And so we internalize that as well. And we carry this idea that somehow others are perfect and we aren't. And that really plants the seeds of the imposter syndrome, doesn't it? Again, something
Mm.
that is very erosive to our well being and that keeps us from really feeling good about all that we're accomplishing. There's so much more, but I'll let you ask another question, Andrew.
Well, I do remember many instances of public humiliation when I was a resident in neurology at McGill. It was traditional once a week. There were rounds, patient was presented, and they would start with the most junior person to discuss the case. And the leader of the discussion was a senior faculty who would ask you questions until you didn't know the answer anymore. So
Mhm.
you always ended on a failure. And in fact, one of the
Pimping
lessons
in a
I've learned
nutshell.
in my personal life is, when things are going great, you go out somewhere, a restaurant or the park, and things are good, everybody's having fun. It's like, let's leave. Let's leave right now while everything is great. And your memories will be, oh, we had such a wonderful time, rather than waiting for somebody to fall and get hurt, or the rain starts, or, let's leave when it's perfect. But that never happens in training. It's always on a sour note, a negative note, that you move on. So I
I
do
think
agree with that.
it's really something, and we carry those stories of being shamed. I in my career of coaching hundreds of physicians, I've heard so many painful stories. I include some of these vignettes in my Mindful MD book because we carry them for years. I share a vignette of someone I call Rafaela, a 47-year-old ID doc, very successful, very well thought of. But you know what? Every day she thought and came to mind a story of something that had happened when she was an intern over 2 decades earlier. A story very similar to what you're talking about being pimped, where she had made an error, not a serious error, but an error. And she had been blamed for that by her resident and then by her attending. And I share that vignette because I think it's something that almost all physicians and others in healthcare can relate to. We hold on to these stories. They're like Velcro in our mind and Teflon for all the good that we're doing. Oh, that's nothing. That's just my job. Oh, don't give me credit for that. And again, that sets the stage for burnout. So many physicians who are burned out are not able to focus on all the good they're doing, all the patients that they're helping, even if they have incurable chronic illnesses, which is so much of what we see in modern medicine. There's still so much good that they're doing with patient after patient. And yet they come to coaching and tell me, I'm not accomplishing anything, Gail. Nothing is going well. I'm not really succeeding in any way. And their head is hung low, their affect is down. They're going home at the end of the day telling their wife or husband and kids about how miserable everything is. And they're going to bed and sleeping poorly because their focus is on what's not going well. There's a lot that isn't going well in healthcare. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to gloss over that. But in any day that a physician has, there are probably bright spots. There are probably things that that physician is doing well. There are probably vulnerable individuals that that physician is helping. And we need that sustenance in really the desert, the dry desert that we kind of find ourselves in the complex healthcare system we all work in. We need those moments of nourishment.
Yeah, I'm going to recap a minute. So one of the concepts I think that you're telling us is that physicians, by virtue of their training, tend to focus more on their inadequacies and failures, which, are inevitable, rather than their successes. And that really rings true to me. I remember when I was in private practice, I would see about, 15, or I'll just don't see that many patients. It takes a long time. So about 15 patients in a day. And every now and then there would be a dissatisfied patient, and they would complain to the administrator, and I get hauled in. Why were you rude to this patient or something? And it may or may not have even been actually true, but it was like that was what drew the attention, was the one dissatisfied patient, and the fact that there had been 14 other patients who thought I was terrific never got noticed. And I think it's probably fair to say that the personality of many physicians is that of a perfectionist. Would you agree with that?
Most definitely. And I think what you're saying is going to resonates, I'm sure, with everybody listening in the physician and healthcare matrix. And that ties into the topic of mindfulness, which can sound like a lot of fluff and woo woo, and oh, just don't tell me to go meditate and life will be wonderful. But it's really more the ability to train our minds to focus where we want our minds to focus. So, what does that mean in terms of what you're sharing about perfectionism? Well, we can begin to notice that we're harping on being a perfectionist. We can notice when our mind is moving in that direction. We can train our mind to look more objectively at all of the data about things that we're doing well. In the example that you gave, we can remind ourselves, well, look at all the patients who are really happy with my care, and look at all the good that I'm doing, and look at the ways that I am up in my field and able to kind of be on a level playing field with others. So a lot of mindfulness, it isn't navel gazing and sitting on the mountaintop. It's really more the moment to moment awareness of what our mind is up to in the service of training our mind to actually be our friend rather than what our minds can sometimes be, which is our foe. That's what really interests me about mindfulness, and what I really have shared with so many coaching clients, and what I share again in the Mindful MD book.
All right. I know one mindfulness trick that I've tried. I read it somewhere and I tried it a few times and I think it worked. They say when you go to bed at night, think of three, or even better, write them down, three good things that happened that day. And it seems so simple, but when you go to bed at night, usually, at least for me, you tend to focus on the one thing that didn't go well that day rather than the three good things. I don't know if that's one of your six, but what do you think about that little practice?
Well, it's an important one because the negativity bias is profound, and that pull down that negativity place of not doing enough, or not good enough, or what's remaining to be done, that has such a hold on the human brain. And yet, when we are mindful of that, when we're aware of it, we can realize that we are not our thoughts and our thoughts are not us. So all of those thoughts about what didn't go well and what remains to be done, and the woulda, coulda, shouldas that we all have, that then lead to a poor night's sleep and exhaustion when we start our workday the next day, we can work with those thoughts. We can detach from them. We can picture them as being almost like clouds that move across the sky of the human mind. And all of those clouds arise, pass through, and dissipate. And the exact same thing is true for 100% of every thought you've had. I mean, think about it for a moment. Have any of the thoughts you've had stayed longer than approximately, 90 seconds or so? No. The only reason they stay is because our mind attaches to them and festers and feeds them, and then develops emotions around them, and more thoughts and more emotions. But we can help our mind detach from thoughts by actually picturing them as clouds moving through the sky. So that's something we can do around perfectionism, around perseveration, around difficult cases, around things that kind of get caught in our mind almost like sticky flypaper. We can build that ability to actually let them pass through.
All right. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time discussing, the problems in healthcare that are oppressing physicians, because I think, everybody's pretty well aware there's too many patients, there's insurance, there's pre-authorizations, there's low salaries, there's inept administrators,
Plenty of
there's
all of that.
COVID, there's all of that because I want to get to the solutions, and what you articulate in your book before we run out of time. So let's talk about the 6 ways to fix these things, at least internally, so we can have a better day.
Well, a lot of it comes down to really focusing on what any individual physician can control and what they can't. And that's a lot of what mindfulness is about. So, we talked about one of the 6 ways that mindfulness can restore your autonomy and cure healthcare burnout, and that is recognizing that you are not your thoughts. The second way is stepping out of mental stories which are the amalgamation of all of the thoughts that we have. And just to share a brief vignette that I detail in the book, it's a physician, a well respected endocrinology leader, who came to coaching very dismayed about her career, didn't think she could continue. And when I asked her a little bit about her life as an endocrinologist, she said to me, Gail, it's all boring, miserable, and tedious. In other words, she'd gone into this field, endocrinology, because she loved the combination of the science and the human element. And yet, what was she facing? She was facing patients who didn't lose weight, who were seeing her because of obesity and wanting obesity meds. She was seeing patients whose A1Cs were through the roof and weren't following their diets. But was really interesting when I asked her how many times a day she had this thought that her practice was boring, tedious, and miserable, she laughed and she said, well, what do you mean, how many times a day? It's how many times an hour. And it turned out she was telling herself this story that her practice was boring, tedious, and miserable so many times a day that she wasn't seeing anything beyond that. She wasn't seeing the patients she helped, the patients she had good interactions with, the staff that she worked well with. So that's an example of the need to step out of mental stories. The third way is to reduce reactivity. So many of us physicians are walking around basically muttering under our breath. It's terrible in healthcare. Nobody's seeing how hard I'm working. All they're doing is focusing on the numbers. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't fair. I didn't sign up to sit in front of a computer, caring and feeding for an EMR. And all of the emotions that we have around that really dissipate the precious energy that we need to get through the difficulties in our days, of which there are many. So, the third way is to use mindfulness to reduce patterns of emotional reactivity, something that I've seen it be extraordinarily helpful for. So, those are the first three, and I'll just quickly go through the last three,
No, no,
which
no, 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 no. I want to learn more about that last one because I've heard those complaints and there's a lot of truth to them. So, what do you do with them? Give me a little bit.
Yes. Well, what you do with them is realize, just like with our thoughts, we have the capacity to let our emotions pass through. When you look at modern neuroscience literature and data around emotions, it's now believed that our emotions, in and of themselves, only last for 60 to 90 seconds. But what keeps those emotions sticking around is all the thoughts that we have. So we might feel angry, we might feel unfair when we sit down to get our charts done. We can notice that emotion. We can take a purposeful pause, a really important mindfulness hack where we slow things down. We take a few slow, deep breaths. We bring our parasympathetic nervous system online to decrease the sympathetic drive that we found ourselves flooded in as our emotional temperature has risen up to 10. This is so unfair, right? So we have tools with mindfulness to cool ourselves down. Why? Because again, that expenditure of energy is costly. It's costly for any physician to feel that sense of duress and anger. It's costly. Those emotions color the character of our day, right? It's probably something you can relate to.
And
So,
they're tiring.
and they are tiring. They're very costly. And I wish we had learned in our training some of these simple hacks and tools. They're not that difficult to learn, and they really make the difference in the quality of our days. They make a difference. As you say, they're so exhausting. We don't have the room for that kind of exhaustion because the amount of burden and pressure that we're facing, that all physicians are facing, we need every little bit of energy to get through that.
All right, now tell me about the last three.
Well, it's not that they're any less important. The fourth way that mindfulness restores your autonomy and cures healthcare burnout is by helping you lean into compassion, connection, and purpose. Most of us went into the practice of medicine to care for others, to care for vulnerable individuals in their times of need, right? And yet we become disconnected from that. We're so caught up in all the technological demands, all the pre-auths, all the satisfying the bean counters, et cetera. And we can return to our sense of compassion, connection, and purpose, and it helps to fuel us. The fifth way is to work with what is. How many times do your listeners just find themselves saying, I'll only be happy when? And I can't be happy if. So, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of physicians walk around saying, well, I'll only be happy when they get rid of this blank EMR, right? I can't be happy with all these non physician administrators dictating the practice of medicine. I'll be happy when I retire. Similarly, residents say to themselves, well, I'll be happy when I'm an attending. And attendings hear that one and they think, wait a minute, wait till you see what your life is like. So we kind of hold off happiness with this mythical idea that we have to wait for something to change to be happy. Now, again, the challenges are many, but I'm here to say that we can all find happiness in the moment. We can all find thriving. And the more we kind of tell ourselves we can't have it until something changes, it actually keeps us from having that level of happiness, contentment, fulfillment, thriving, whatever you want to call it. It keeps us from having it in the here and now. And
Uh,
each of you listening to this program deserves to have all of those things here today. So that's the fifth way to work with what is, not this imaginary fiction of what could be. And the sixth way is really I would say, the culmination of the first five, which is cultivating upward as opposed to downward spirals. I mean, there's such a vortex of negativity in healthcare these days. I've had so many clients say to me, I don't even want to talk to my colleagues because
mm,
all they do is blank and moan about everything going wrong, right? And then we get home and we talk about everything that went wrong in our day. We can reverse that pattern, and mindfulness can really help us do that. So that's a quick synopsis, Andrew, of the six ways that I outline in my Mindful MD book, which is available for pre-order on Amazon.
Yes, well, I will also put a link on my website, a little book icon in the library section. So that'll be another place you can find it. And that'll take you right to Amazon, or just go directly to Amazon. Well, it sounds like a book I'm going to read. A lot of what you said, well, number five kind of had echoes of the serenity prayer, right? It's like, well, this is the way it is. And, have the what is it, the wisdom to know the difference between the things you can fix and the things you can't, and go along with it. That's an element of dealing with reality.
Mhm.
And
Yes, and I've had a surprising number of clients actually say to me, now, Gail, I'm noticing in myself that when I let go of what I can't control, I'm a lot happier. It's a very frequent refrain that people have. And then a surprising number as well say, now, is there some kind of prayer about that? So that's what you're referring to there. It's a
yes,
helpful
yes.
reminder
And
that
and
whatever, yeah,
the other
whatever.
thing it reminded me of was locumtenens, because well, as you know, I've been doing locums off and on since 1982. And when I do a locums assignment, I find it's more relaxing, even if the work is harder or more, and there are many challenges in a new place. And I think about that. It's like, well, why is that? And I think part of it is when you do a locums assignment, you are a temporary person.
Mhm,
And you know that going in. And so when you go in, you see all these things that aren't the way that they should be, which is often the reason they need a temporary person, because they don't have a permanent person. But it's not your job to fix those things. It's
mm,
only your job to see patients, write your notes, and go home.
mhm,
And you don't even try. They don't want you to try. You know, you don't have any credibility. You just showed up anyway. So, because those problems are not your problems, whereas when you're an assistant professor at Harvard, you know, there's this hierarchy, there's the way things are, and maybe they're not the way they should be, and that there are committees to try and fix them, and it's all kind of exhausting. But it, correct me if I'm wrong. but
Well, isn't it interesting? Because part of our training, and I touch on this in the roots of burnout section, is that we're taught that we can fix everything, right? We're taught that we can control the uncontrollable, which is the state of the human body ultimately. And we carry that over. And so we do walk around in our jobs thinking, well, they're doing this wrong, and I know the right way to do it, and why don't they just listen to me? And yet sometimes that gets in the way of our being more effective, because I want everybody listening, every physician out there, to be as skillful as possible in getting non-clinician administrators to listen. We have to have a seat at the table. We have to have our voice heard, but we have to be open to the voices of others as well. There are other people who bring a lot to the healthcare equation. And so what I explore in the book, and certainly in my coaching of hundreds of physicians, is how to be more resourceful so that you can expand your locus of control and make it as effective as possible. Because it's not about just standing by and watching kind of healthcare go down the drain, as many would say. It's about how to have a meaningful voice, which feels good, which is a sense of accomplishment. And but again, we don't always learn that in our training, yet we can.
yes, and you're doing it with
Trying.
with this book, and you have another book I saw about resilience, and so I know this is a topic you've been sort of engaged in for quite a while. I liked your point about people focusing on good things when they talk to each other rather than just complaining and whining. And I've noticed I have a few friends who, when I meet with them, I noticed one day that they never complained about anything. Never.
Mm,
And it was as if their lives, I mean, they didn't boast or anything, but the things they would talk about were the positive things that had happened to them that day. And it just dawned on me. It's like, well, these are people that must have negative things that are happening to them too. For example, a real estate agent would tell me, oh, I'm working with this couple and they're trying to buy this house and we did this and we did that. And not focusing on the other client that she had who didn't show up or who didn't pay or didn't do what they were supposed to do, which I'm sure happens also. And I have a few friends like that, and then it dawned on me, maybe that's why they're my friends.
You know how to pick good people.
Is
Yeah.
that without thinking about it, that they
Mm,
gravitated towards their positivity.
right.
And I bet they do it intentionally. And so I think
Mm,
for physicians to do that with each other, to be intentional about there's this expression that's kind of trendy now: celebrate your wins.
mm,
I agree with that. I have found that that is a very useful, it seems, kind of silly maybe, that of course you're going to have wins, but there are losses, and we certainly give
mm.
undue emphasis to those during the day, right? As you described. So
Well,
maybe it's a good idea to celebrate the wins.
well, two things that I think are very interesting about that, Andrew. The first is if we pay attention to how it feels when we celebrate wins versus when we dwell on the opposite of wins, failures or difficulties. When we actually tune in and notice what our inner experience is, and furthermore, as you're talking about, when we notice what it feels like when we interact with somebody who's focused on their wins as opposed to the complaints. Because what I've seen for myself and for the physicians that I coach is that there's a greater sense of inner ease. There's a little
Hmm.
bit of an uptick as opposed to a downtick. So that's the first thing about focusing on wins. The second is, if you think about it, if you spend your life complaining about what isn't going well, the weather, the problems in healthcare, problems in your marriage or with your kids or whatever the heck it is, you get really good at that complaining muscle, don't you? And then you turn 70, 75, 80, and I hate to say it, but you become one of those elderly individuals, that kind of crotchety old man or old woman that we all notice and we think, oh, I don't want to be like that when I get older, right? So it's almost, the neuroplasticity part of it, that what we focus on grows stronger. And so, if you can work with your mind, if you can use a mindful approach to get to know your own patterns and what's in it for you, to focus more on what's going well, you can build that muscle as well. You can reclaim how your synapses actually connect to one another. That, what fires together wires together is an old adage, but you can explain, as the neurologist here, why there's actually a lot of truth to that, that we're understanding that on a neuroscience basis, that that is the truth. So if you don't want to become one of those whining elderly folks, you can start building your capacity to focus on what is going well, not in a Pollyanna, just put a smile on your face, everything will be great type of way, but in a realistic way. And I think that's really important for each and every one of us to do, to uplift all boats in healthcare rather than contributing again to that vortex of a downward spiral.
Yes, the vortex is waiting for you out there.
Indeed.
Yeah, this has been terrific. I'm so pleased that you took the time to speak with us, and we're running out of time. But I have one quick. I think it's a quick question. When I was reviewing your materials, what are Schwartz Center rounds?
Oh, interesting. Short center rounds are something that happens at a lot of hospitals across the country, which is a bringing together of clinicians, multidisciplinary, everybody on the healthcare team, to talk about some pressing issue. So there could be a really difficult case, there could be a premature death, there could be the chronic problem of the revolving door and understaffing. And it's an opportunity for people to come together and talk in a very real way about what that's like for them, to actually build community, which is so important. Again, one of my 6 ways: lean into connection, compassion, and purpose. So I don't participate in rounds. I don't run them myself. And yet there's something that's really been very positive in the healthcare landscape.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I had never heard that term. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. And I really hope I've been able to dispel this idea of mindfulness just being this kind of out there thing, navel gazing, etc., and really helped your listeners to understand what's in it for them, to recognize that they're not their thoughts, to step out of stories, to reduce reactivity, to really not hand over their happiness to a broken healthcare system, because no physician has to do that. So those are really my probably my most important parting words.
Very well said. Well, thank you, Dr. Gail Gazelle, for being a guest on the Art of Medicine.
Thank you so much.
Before we close, I'd like to give another thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com, a resource where providers can get real, unbiased answers about locum tenens. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time. This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on the Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests, and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com